how are ya? How you be doing? If you thought the Wicked discourse on Unsurprisingly was over, you thought wrong, my friend. I just have one more thing I want to discuss before we close out our time in the Wicked verse, at least for a while. I'm still on the fence about whether or not I want to read Gregory Maguire's newest Wicked Years novel, Elphie, A Wicked Childhood, because I think it would be a trip to get a more in-depth look at Elphaba's childhood in more detail than Wicked the book and the movie provide. But anyway, there's this very annoying cliche that pseudo-intellectuals and performative avid readers like to impose on others that the book is always, like every time without exception, better than the film or TV adaptation it's turned into. And as someone who engages in both mediums of media on an equal basis, I don't really give a shit for this chicken versus the egg debate. When it comes to which presentation format one chooses to have a specific story told to them first. But with Wicked, I did read the book first, just because at the time I was on something that you could probably refer to as a literary high, while simultaneously the trailer for Wicked had just come out. And book reviews and book videos were the initial vision that led to my channel's creation back in 2023. But I was still familiar with the plotline of the musical of Wicked, even though I had never seen it live on stage. Because when you grow up being practically raised in the theater scene, you don't have to see a live showing of a musical that has attained worldwide commercial success like Wicked. You hear and sing the soundtrack enough times that you already know the basic storyline, the characters, and the main lessons you are to take away as an audience member, or in my case, a mere listener. Anyway, all that was to say, I didn't exactly go into Wickedland with a blank slate because I knew when I picked it up to read it, there you can see, you happy now? I wasn't going to get the same story as the one I was told in the musical version. And if I were telling the entire truth and no fibbing, I have never seen a book that was so vastly different than its stage/film adaptation. I mean, the only things that are consistent throughout both the book and the musical are the characters themselves and the setting, the Land of Oz. Everything else about Gregory Maguire's 1995 novel is so not in line with the whimsicality and the bravado that Winnie Holzman and Stephen Schwartz brought to life for a viewing and listening audience. And if you've seen the musical and you have no intentions of reading the book, then you've come to the right place today, because I'm going to tell you all the ways the New York Times bestseller Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, is different from Wicked the musical. Now, if you're considering reading the book and you don't want spoilers, then that goes without saying, click off this video, because I'm going to be spilling all the tea. I'm going to be telling you everything that happens. Well, the most crucial things that happen that make it separate from the musical. So now that you know what to expect for the next several minutes, let's get it popping up in this shit. Now, I had heard from others who had read the book before about Elphaba being a hermaphrodite, but here's the specific passage in the chapter Birth of a Witch where the notion of her biological sex is mentioned.
"Another willful boy,"
said the fishwife, sighing.
"Shall we kill it?" "Don't be so nasty to it,"
said the crone.
"It's a girl."
"Ha!" said the bleary-eyed maiden. "Look again. There's the weather vane." For a minute they were in disagreement, even with the child naked before them. Only after a second and third rub was it clear that the child was indeed feminine. So as you notice, her anatomy doesn't point entirely toward male or toward entirely female either. And her nanny, well, like she is her nanny, but like that's like actually her name in the book, Nanny. An old woman who was Elphaba and her siblings' primary caregiver. And the book's equivalent to Dosey Bear, but mean and critical instead. Theorizes that Elphaba is some sort of unestablished, unrecognized sex. And her temperament is much more brash in the book than in the musical. In the musical, she's depicted as a well-behaved, docile, young girl with green skin who only acts out when she's provoked. But in the book, she's born with features that a baby has to grow into. A full set of teeth, skips straight past the soft baby food stage of normal human development, and takes to solid food immediately after birth. And she's not an inherently bad child, but she does have a strong animalistic instinct that makes adults say, "Oh, what a naughty, naughty little child you are." She bites unprovoked. She makes noises like growls and other guttural noises to communicate, instead of crying or whimpering like normal human babies do. I don't know if it was because she couldn't communicate through spoken language yet, or she did understand spoken language, but she just chose not to speak for some reason. If my memory serves me well, that is, I could have sworn to God that someone at one point in the book said baby Elphaba could understand what the people around her were saying, but she just didn't want to talk. But you know what? If that is the case, maybe those unprovoked bites were not so unprovoked at all, because she'd be able to know all the horrible things that everybody was calling her. And one thing that the book aligns with the musical on, Elphaba and Nessa Rose's mom being someone who gets around, which leads them to be half-sisters in the book instead of full-blood sisters like they are in the musical. And the only child their mom bore with her actual husband, minister, not governor, Frex Parthrop, is Elphaba and Nessa Rose's very handsome, very thirsted after brother Shell. Yes, Shell is in Seashells by the Seashore. I mean, it's the land of Oz. Do you really expect any name to be real? I mean, well, any name can be real, but it's another thing to have an embarrassing or silly name. Something Hollywood celebrities know very well how to gift their offspring. Anyway, back on topic. In the Gregory Maguire novel, Elphaba's biological father is the wizard, who at the time of Elphaba's conception is a traveling salesman, just like in the musical, and we learn his full name is Oscar Zoroaster Diggs, and Elphaba's conceived in the same way. Slutty and lonely housewife Melina board bangs him. She drinks a green potion he gives her, which turns Elphaba green, and Nessa Rose's biological father is a nomadic, hot AF glassblower named Turtleheart, who comes to stay with the Throps, the invitation none other than from Melina, and becomes her and Frex's constant source of pleasure that eventually paves the way for the conception of Nessa Rose, who was born without limbs. She's like one of those little egg-shaped toys from the first Toy Story. And Frex knows he's cool with it, because they're doing the polyamory thing. They're a throuple, like they are literally, like they are for real. A throuple. So as you can tell, the Throp family is a lot more messy and chaotic in the book. At least I personally think so. So in the book, as far as supernatural powers go, Glinda is the one born with them and Elphaba is not. Book Elphaba's real gift is superior intelligence and capacity for information retention. And the Glinda and Elphaba friendship backstory is pretty much the same as in the musical. Shallow popular girl gets roomed with the freak of nature bookworm without consent. They start off on the wrong foot, but they come to like each other and get to know each other from sharing a living space. Except that in the book, Elphaba does intentionally come to Shiz to study magic as a student at Shiz. She attends her first year alone until Nessa Rose and Nanny join her the next year. Also the same, desperate Munchkinland boy fawns over the prettiest girl at Shiz, who would never even consider him a potential boyfriend. But unlike in the musical, Bach doesn't get with Nessa Rose in the book. I don't even think they interact with each other at all. And Book Fierro has a completely different vibe and physique. He has a more exotic look. He's dark-skinned, and he fits more of the aloof bad boy archetype, and walks around with diamonds painted all over his body due to his royal heritage. And when he comes to Shiz, he's already married and has a wife and children back home. Now, I know you're probably thinking, isn't he like 19 or something? Well, here's the thing. He was thrown into an arranged marriage as a child. In his culture, arranged marriage is normalized amongst royalty, and they get hitched up quite early. Now, before you ask, does he still get with Elphaba? Just hold on, I'm getting there. But what I will say for now is that he never gets with Glinda. There's never a you're hot, I'm hot, which means we should date relationship for them. But all the Shiz characters still come together to make a friend group, just like in the musical. And apparently, Book Elphaba's really good at singing. I mean, everyone in the musical is good at singing. But Book Elphaba is praised for her singing talent during a night where the group is all chilling out at the Ozdust, which in the book is an underground hole-in-the-wall nightclub, instead of a swankified upscale venue, the way it's depicted in the musical. And as far as the Ozian politics go, the citizens of Oz in the book are facing the same social justice issues like in the musical, like animals' rights to speak being taken away. And Elphaba's eagerness to keep that from happening is still present in the book. And Madame Morrible, who in the novel is described as looking like a fish, looking all Mrs. Puff and whatnot, just for clarification, she's not a fish. She's a human who looks like a fish, just in case that wasn't clear. Anywho, rather than taking powerful Elphaba under her wing and teaching her how to harness her powers to prove herself worthy of working with the wizard, she enlists the help of both Elphaba and Glinda, who are two of the most excellent students at Shiz University, to help her in her plan to bring peace to Oz, in the midst of the horrible political climate it's in, which is of course in both the novel and the musical. It's just a front to appear as an ally. ally, while she causes destruction behind the scenes. But Elphaba and Glinda can tell that she's full of shit and decide to travel to the Emerald City to ask the wizard for help directly. Straight to his face, but he turns them down. So unlike in the musical, there's no big truth reveal, no dramatic exit. The man just says, "No, off with you, go." And of course, there's no gravity defying either. But Elphaba decides to stay in the Emerald City and hide out somewhere and craft an action plan of her own in secret that fights for the justice of the animals in Oz, and tells Glinda to go back to Shiz without her and to take care of Nessa Rose. So instead of hiding out in an alcove in the forest because Madame Morrible and the rest of Oz has made her a singular enemy, she's rather a part of an enemy group and lives alone in a warehouse makeshift apartment with her pet cat, Malky. Literally the dream. Well, except the being hunted by the wizard's policeman part. 5 or so years have gone by since her and Glinda separated. Fiyera's in the Emerald City and finds Elphaba meditating in a church. They reunite, she brings him back to her place. They hang out for a while, one visit turns into several visits as the days pass. He grows closer with Elphaba, he joins the rebel movement, sexual tension heats up and builds, and hey, before you know it, they're more than friends. And yes, Fiyero is still married with kids. Elphaba and her mother aren't so different after all, so they definitely have more of a slow burn romance in the book. Whereas in the musical, it's like they liked each other in secret for a long time, but when Fiyero took the risk of finally choosing her, their reunion was spicy and let's get it on now kind of vibin'. But in the novel, their secret affair is cut short by the two of them getting caught by the wizard's policeman. Elphaba escapes, but Fiyero is captured and beaten to death. And of course, because Elphaba has no superpowers that can turn him into a scarecrow, his mortality is real and final. Now this is where the plot line of the book strays very dramatically away from the original literary work. How does Elphaba react to such a traumatic moment? If she doesn't have superpowers or the Grimoire to cast a spell to save her beloved Fiyero, she seeks shelter at a nearby convent, where the nuns provide her warmth and shelter from the frigid cold. But when she arrives, she's a bit sleepy would be an understatement. She goes into a shock-induced catatonic, almost coma-like state from the trauma of seeing her lover die right in front of her, the trauma and depression of losing the love of her life. And something quite extraordinary happens. While she's in the state of unawakened consciousness, she gives birth to her and Fiero's son. Yeah, homegirl was in her first trimester of pregnancy when she came to the convent. But that's not the extraordinary part. When she comes out of her catatonic state, she has no memory of it. I mean, of course, she didn't know she was pregnant at that night she arrived at the convent. On the night of Fiero's death, she has no memory of the feeling of a fetus growing in her stomach, no memory of giving birth. Thus, when the story makes a time jump, she has no idea who that young boy at the convent is. She has no idea the young boy at the convent, who the nuns named Lear, is her son. To her, he's just that one bothersome fat boy. I mean, of course she doesn't call him that bothersome fat boy. But in the book, it's very clear that her maternal instinct is very, very weak and doesn't connect the dots after a very long time has passed that Lear is actually her kid. So in the years that she spent living at the convent with the nuns and recovering from the intense trauma surrounding Fiero's violent death, she becomes a nun herself and I guess gives herself to Oz. Instead of giving herself to God, would she be giving herself to Oz? I guess. But after several years, she decides to peace out, to be a traveling missionary instead. And the nuns send Lear with her under the pretense of being assigned as her servant boy to accompany her on her travels. And of course, Elphaba's peeved at their insistence to take the annoying, chatty little lad with her. So I guess she has a slight maternal instinct, even if it was very weak. She could have just left him behind at any point, but she didn't. So Elphaba and Lear spend their time traveling as missionaries. And during these travels, she discovers she has some sort of extrasensory perception of some sort, which is animal telepathy. Animals who have lost their ability to speak and communicate through words can communicate with her non-verbally, and she can communicate back to them in a way that they understand, which leads to the adoption of her pet wolf, Killjoy. But at some point during these travels, Elphaba becomes so consumed with guilt and shame for sleeping with another woman's husband that she decides to abandon the missionary group and travel to Kiyamako, Fiero's native land, to confess to his wife Sarima what she had done. But when she arrives there and meets the warm, welcoming, hospitable Sarima, she just cannot bring herself to tell her. Sarima allows Elphaba and Lear to stay at their castle upon finding out that they are homeless. And over time, Elphaba and Sarima become really close friends, and her initial short visit turns into a more permanent stay, where she basically becomes integrated into the family. I mean, Lear gets there eventually after Fiero's sons stop viciously bullying him. So much time passes, and Elphaba still cannot tell Sarima that her husband was a cheater, and she's the one that had the love affair with him that bore a child, because she doesn't want to risk losing her chosen family of sorts. So during this time that she's living with the royal family in Kiyomiko, she sort of deludes herself that her being BSFs with Sarima is repaying her dues and correcting her past mistakes. But Sarima is very smart and she's very intuitive. That Elphaba has something to hide about Fiero that has a lot of arrows pointing toward an extramarital affair. And ultimately, because she cares more about the bond she's developed with Elphaba, she explicitly tells Elphaba not to discuss Fiero in any shape, form, or capacity. I mean, Elphaba did make it known early on to Selima that she was at least a classmate of Fiero's at Shiz. So Selima always knew that she was at least acquainted with him. Like, she just wants to keep it at, y'all were just classmates, and that's it. Like, that's all the information that's necessary for her to know. She wants to know no more than that because of what it might reveal. So everyone just continues to be this one big happy family without the confirmation or denial of any past relationships with the long gone prince. Now, this is where the Wiccan musical and book kind of start mirroring each other again, just slightly though. Elphaba's father is still alive, went from Quackadoodle minister to the ruler of Munchkinland until he passed down the title and job to Nessa Rose. A job that was meant to go to Elphaba, but Homegirl ran away to hide out and join the Great Political Rebellion of Oz. Now, Nessa Rose does have supernatural capabilities because the silver slippers she owns and promises that Elphaba will inherit after she passes. Cast the spell on them that makes them unremovable from Dorothy's feet. And if you're wondering, girl, didn't you say she's got no limbs? And yes, I did say that. I wasn't lying to you. Nessa Rose learned how to channel her powers by studying magic at Shiz, became an official witch, and cast a spell that gave her limbs and the ability to walk. So after Elphaba makes a brief visit to Munchkinland to have a family meeting of sorts with Frex and Nessa Rose, she returns to the castle of Kiyomiko, where she finds that Sarima and the rest of the royal family have been captured and imprisoned at the instruction of the wizard for Fiero's betrayal many years ago. So several years pass. Elphaba and Lear continue to stay at the castle of Kiyomiko as their permanent residents, even in the absence of the royal family. She uses this time to master her understanding of the Grimoire spells and see whether or not her hard work will somehow actually give her powers if she practices enough, which leads her to take on a monkey as her main test subject, which we all know is Chistery. And lo and behold, she becomes so laser focused on one particular levitation spell that gives the monkey wings. And that's the only spell that she manages to cast successfully. So with her being alone most of the time, attending to her studies, and grieving the loss of her chosen family and out for vengeance, Elphaba turns into an isolation-induced madwoman who wants nothing to do with anything or anyone, not even Lear, her own son. Not surprisingly, of course. That doesn't include the Grimoire or anything that can help her in her work with magic. So while all this is going on with Elphaba at the castle, the wizard is really wrecking havoc on Oz from his power trip that's about to ensue a civil war. Kind of like what's going on in present day America, wouldn't you say? And shit's about to get a whole lot worse, with Dorothy swirling into town and crushing Nessa Rose. Which means Elpha's gonna get them magic shoes. But as you know, Glinda beat her to it and gave them to Dorothy, sending Elphaba, who, yeah, kinda wants to avenge her sister's death, but more importantly, needs to get them shoes because of what they could do for her and her quest for attaining supernatural abilities herself, at least in her mind. Now, before you ask if Glinda and Elphaba make up in secret and pay tearful goodbyes at the castle, the answer is no, but they do reunite and reconnect their friendship a bit during Elphaba's first trip back to Munchkinland to meet with her family several years prior. But no, in the book, their final interaction was a heated confrontation about Glinda giving Dorothy the slippers, and they parted in bad blood. But not before Not before. She's off to see the wizard. Now that definitely deserves a simple crash, where she begs him to release Sarima and the rest of the royal family, and in return she will give him the Grimoire, only to be met with the devastating news that they killed off all the family except for Fiero's only daughter, Nor, who he has made his slave, which is the very last straw for Elphaba, and catapults her headfirst into an irreversible state of wickedness. Not sure if that deserves a symbol crash or not. I don't think so, but I'll give myself one because it's the effort that counts. So now Elphaba is out on a revenge rampage, and is out for everyone who has wronged her or done heinous things to the innocent, starting with Madame Morrible, after finding out she's been working alongside the wizard in secret all these years, and most likely the one responsible for the death of Dr. Dillamond. Yes, sadly Dr. Dillamond does not survive in the book, the dear old goat. Now when Elphaba finds Madame Morrible, now a decrepit, barely conscious, bedridden old lady, she takes a club and ends the old lady with a good bada swing to the noggin. And I forget how, but at one point during her revenge rampage / journey back to the castle, she finds out the wizard is her biological father. And when she finally makes it back home, Lear tells her the wizard sent Dorothy and her friends to kill her, which is why she sends Chistery and the other flying monkeys she casts levitation spells on after all of them, but only managed to capture Dorothy and Toto. And when little Dorothy, sweet as a peach, tried to apologize for killing her sister, Elphaba totally locked in on her peak villain era as having none of it, and sets the weeping girl's skirt on fire, prompting Dorothy to throw a nearby bucket of water on herself to put the fire out. That splashed onto Elphaba's face, and, well, you've seen The Wizard of Oz, you know what happens. Apparently, as a grown-ass adult, she didn't know she was allergic to water. And yes, she is actually dead in the book. She's not faking her death like she did in the musical, where she runs away in secrecy with Fiero to live happily ever after. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why, if Book Fiero is not the Scarecrow, why did they make him the Scarecrow in the musical? Well, at one point where Elphaba sees the Scarecrow from a distance, when she's looking out from the tower in the castle, when him, the Tin Man, and the Lion are walking toward the castle's entrance, she thought he looked like Fiero and had a hot minute of wishful thinking that Fiero had faked his death in order to hide out from society and eventually make his way back to her. But once he and the rest of Dorothy's friends got to the castle and she saw him up close, she realized that was just a man made out of straw, plain and simple. Now, instead of Glinda being the one who finds the green bottle, like in the musical, it's Dorothy who discovers it in the book after Elphaba is melted dead. Upon presenting it to the wizard, he panics and leaves Oz in his hot air balloon of shame. And there you have it! Wicked, the life and times of the Wicked Witch of the West, broken down for you so you don't have to read it. Well, I mean, you can still read it if you want, but why would you want to after I just told you everything that happens? I don't know, to each their own, do what floats your boat. I hope I remembered everything correctly, because it's been a year and a half since I read this, so don't at me if I get something wrong. Now, I'm not planning on reading any of the other Wicked series books, and still considering the newest one, about Elphaba's childhood in Munchkinland, but let me know if any of you watching have read the other books in the Wicked series, Son of a Witch, Lion Among Men, or Out of Oz. Let me know if you enjoyed it, or whether or not it's worth the read. And who knows, maybe I just might be convinced out of my stubbornness to not dive in back into the Gregory Maguire Oz lore. But I'd just like to take a quick minute to say thank you so very much for watching my video, and extra snaps and gold stars if you watched all the way through, and watched from beginning to end. You is the real MVP, and I count you in as one of my faves. And if you really do be vibing with me or just my general commentary, then be a part of this wickedly cool emotional support coven. And you're probably wondering, what the fuck is that? What kind of spell do I have to cast from the Grimoire to join? And the answer is none. You just have to find wherever it says subscribe on your screen and just go like this with your finger. Bing! And if you want top tier access, turn on those channel notifications so you have a better chance of getting the first flex for every new video that drops bi-weekly. Stay cool, fresh, and I'll see you next time. Bye!